Right, hello guys, and welcome back to my latest and greatest Titan build for the Edge of Fate. Today we are covering what I'm affectionately referring to as the Green Man build. Mainly because yes, this is a Strand Titan build, but also, this particular Green Man is so powerful that one of his abilities deals more damage than a Cuirass of the Falling Star Thundercrash, and on a much shorter cooldown too. So, if you'd like to learn how to make your own Green Man achieve this, then you'll want to stick around, and if you enjoy this type of content, then a like and subscribe is greatly appreciated. Alright then, hyperbole and jokes aside, today's build is going to focus primarily on the newly buffed Wishful Ignorance exotic gauntlets. And I wasn't kidding, by the way, these things seriously allow you to deal Thundercrash levels of damage with your melee, so let's dive into why that's possible. In the Edge of Fate, several melee-based exotics had their melee damage increases drastically brought up in order to accommodate for the brand new additive stacking system, and one of those exotics was Wishful Ignorance. The changes listed that the maximum PvE Frenzied Blade and Fleshit Storm damage was being increased to 200%, which specifically in the case of Fleshit Storm was massive, mainly because it was originally 50%. Furthermore, Banner of War's melee damage bonus was also raised from 40% to 100%, and the addition of the brand new melee stat, specifically the maximum multiplicative melee damage increase of 30% at 200 stat, have elevated this exotic to previously unseen heights. But before we dive into the crazy numbers, let's get a quick refresher on what these gauntlets actually do. For starters, Wishful Ignorance grants you a 4th Frenzied Blade charge and augments the behavior of both your Frenzied Blade and Fleshit Storm melee abilities to increase their damage with consecutive uses. And the best way to see this happening is with Frenzied Blade, where with each melee hit dealt, I'm granted a stack of Wish Dragon's Talons up to ×3. And I'll have the numbers on screen, but as you can see, the melee damage jumps up rather significantly with each consecutive strike. And the same applies to Fleshit Storm, it's just that it's a little harder to see the numbers. Furthermore, for each pulse of your Banner of War, Wishful Ignorance grants a varying amount of melee energy based on the amount of fireteam members within the banner itself, with the user counting as one person. So you still get energy if it's just you, but in a typical 3-person fireteam, especially at Banner of War ×4, the melee gains are incredibly noticeable. Just take a look at this side-by-side comparison for Banner of War ×4 for both solo and a 3-person fireteam. The difference is rather apparent. So, now that you know what this exotic does, let's go back to that damage example. With Cuirass of the Falling Star and 200 super stat, according to the board, my Thundercrash deals 15,013 damage, but with Wishful Ignorance, 200 melee stat, a 1-2 punch shotgun, and Banner of War, a full volley of my Fleshit Storm deals upwards of 15,200 damage, which for a melee ability that, depending on fireteam size, you can get back pretty quickly is, dare I say, rather spectacular. And that, dear viewer, is the basis of today's build. The rest involves finding consistent ways to push the setup even further and building heavily into melee regen sources so we can spam this powerful ability as often as we possibly can. So let's take things one step at a time, starting with our subclass configuration. For the basic abilities, because we're locked to pure Strand, we of course have the Blade Fury Super, Rally Barricade, Frenzied Blade, and I've gone for the Grapple Grenade for superior movement and to add yet another melee damage option to the build. Before we move along, a quick note on Blade Fury. You may not know this, but certain supers in the game fully refund a selection of abilities after they end. Like for example, the Warlock Song of Flame refunds both your grenade and melee abilities, the Titan Glacial Quake returns only your melee abilities, and actually, so too does Blade Fury, where upon super end, it fully restores all 4 of your Frenzied Blade charges, perfect for getting right back into the Fleshit Storm loop. Anyway, for the aspects, we are indeed taking both Fleshit Storm and Banner of War, and there is some more information I want to add regarding Fleshit Storm. As you saw in the damage clip, I used a 1-2 punch shotgun to boost the damage of my Fleshit Storm even further, but you should know that this isn't strictly essential. And here's what I mean. By default, with less than 100 melee stat, the initial knockback from Fleshit Storm deals 106 damage, and with 1-2 punch, this does indeed go up to now 265, the expected 150% increase. However, that's all that it buffs. Any consecutive slashes won't deal increased melee damage, and as you can see from this side-by-side comparison, each slash deals 134 damage 3 times, regardless of whether 1-2 punch is there or not. So this just means you don't need to rely on a shotgun or soon-to-be hand cannons with this perk, which is rather nice because the bulk of the damage is already baked in. By the way, if you join the Discord server today and enter the code word GreenMan into the code words channel, you'll gain exclusive access to a behind-the-scenes channel where you can contribute to the making of these videos. So come join, link in the description. Fragments-wise, not much has changed over the years, and the standard picks are still just as strong, starting with Thread of Warding to make it so collecting an Orb of Power grants 5 seconds of Woven Mail, which will help with our overall survivability and mesh well with some of our artifact perk choices. After that, we have Thread of Generation. This one simply makes it so dealing damage generates create grenade energy, which is just here in case we end up losing our grapple as a means of expediting the process of getting it back. Next, we're taking Thread of Fury. This one is definitely the most important because it states that damaging targets with a tangle grants melee energy, and depending on how many targets are hit, this can result in some serious melee energy returns, and given that we want our melees back as quickly as possible, then this one is a no-brainer choice. Finally, the last fragment we'll need is Thread of Transmutation. This one will make it so while you have Woven Mail, weapon final blows create a tangle, which is just a nice perk to have because it means you have more ways of making tangles outside of your main abilities, and also it does give plus 10 melee stat, which is very important for making this build work, which neatly brings us onto the next section of the build, the optimal stat distribution. Stats-wise, you can probably already guess what we are prioritizing, and yes, it's 100% the melee stat. And this time we're juicing it to the max, and my recommendation is to have exactly 160 melee. Reason being is because we can hit the cap of 200 with 2 melee fonts on the gloves, giving a little bit of room for investment in other stats, namely super and grenade. My distribution features 160 melee, 85 super, and a pitiful 24 grenade. So if your armor allows for it, then definitely try to put more into grenade, but sadly mine does not. However, still also try to get at least 70 or 80 points in super because Fleshit Storm damage and kills generate a pretty good chunk of super energy, especially at high levels. And remember, it's good to get your super back quickly because, like I mentioned earlier, upon exit it fully refunds all 4 of your Frenzied Blade charges, aka your main offensive tool. Furthermore, your stat investment dictates the melee energy returned from various sources that we've already discussed, such as pulses from Banner of War or Thread of Fury. And the cap for this is 100 stats, but I still wanted to let you know this because it's important to consider when making any kind of ability-centric build. And there are a couple more sources of melee energy we are yet to discuss, more on these in a moment, but to summarize, try to get exactly 160 melee, 80 super, and the rest can go into grenade, ideally 50 plus. Moving on to the weapons and artifacts section, we ought to start with the main supporting weapon, which is of course the Monte Carlo exotic auto-rifle. Monte Carlo is a staple for any melee-based build, and for good reason too. Direct damage with the weapon will grant small chunks of melee energy that again does scale with the melee stat, and it also has a 1 in 4 chance to fully refund a single melee charge after getting a kill. But more importantly, the main reason we want it is because of the bayonet catalyst, because if you didn't know, in the Edge of Fate, the previous damage reduction of the bayonet to bosses, mini-bosses, and champions has been removed, and the bayonet is now dealing some serious damage as a result. Take these mini-bosses here. A single Fleshit Storm kill is enough to kickstart a never-ending bayonet chain that one-shots every single mini-boss. Same goes for a champion, utterly neutralized. And the best part, each kill with the bayonet refills roughly 70% of a full Frenzied Blade charge, meaning you don't need that many kills with it to fully restore all 4 of your charges, which by the way is the gameplay loop I would recommend going for. Simply expend all of your Fleshit Storm charges, then spam the bayonet until you can do it all over again. Bonus points if you use the chainsaw ornament. Of course, the actual weapon itself isn't at all bad either. At 5 stacks of Markov chain, earned easily by scoring a single melee kill, the weapon is dealing 65% increased damage. And personally, I always enjoy using this weapon. I think it's to do with the sound, just music to the ears really. I've also gone for a 1-2 punch shotgun in the energy slot. Any will do really, as it's just there to boost the initial damage of your Fleshit Storm volleys for any chunky targets. As for the artifact, this season there are plenty of useful mods that benefit both the uptime of our abilities and directly buff them, giving new functionalities, starting with Tightly Woven in column 2. This perk is going to make it so while you have Woven Mail, both your grenade and class stats gain plus 20 points, which at least for my stats is a good help to bolster my grenade a little, but for you it may not be as necessary, but still a nice bonus to have. After that, we're taking Refreshed Threads in column 3. This perk is going to make it so picking up a tangle grants energy to your least charged ability. Given that we aren't using our barricade or grapple terribly often, this should grant a bonus amount of energy exclusively to our melee, and actually, taking a look in game, the energy returned is roughly 1/3 of a charge, which is pretty decent. Next, we have Threaded Blast in column 4. This perk states that destroying a tangle with strand damage increases the radius and damage of the explosion, where normally it looks like this, but with Threaded Blast, it now looks like this. But to be fair, this won't be happening terribly often because we aren't using any strand weapons, but it is just here on the off chance one of our Fleshit Storm slashes ends up connecting. The second to last perk we're taking is Shield Crush. This one makes it so while you have Woven Mail, your melee recharges 25% faster and deals 25% more damage. And given that melee damage stacking is additive now, in the grand scheme of things, this isn't a lot, but it is nice to have for the regen bonus. Finally, the last perk we're going to need is Tangled Web. This perk states that creating a tangle by defeating a strand debuff target creates a suspending expanding explosion, and as you can see here, the radius is pretty wide, making for a nice crowd control addition to the build. Now it's time for some set bonus crafting, and out of all the available sets, there is basically just one that stands out the most when it comes to supporting this build, that being the Collective Psyche set from the Desert Perpetual raid, specifically for the 4-piece bonus, because it reads, suspend, unravel, and sever effects applied to targets and radiant and restoration effects applied to you have increased duration. So given that we're going to be dishing out all 3 of those effects in some capacity, it makes the most sense to have this. And as for the potency of the buff itself, taking a look side by side, base sever lasts for 10 seconds, but with the raid armor now lasts for 15 seconds, an overall 50% increase in its effect, which by my standards is pretty bloody good. And I know it does involve running what might be the hardest raid in the game, but good news, I just posted a no BS guide on it, so feel free to check that out and go score yourself some raid armor with your newfound knowledge. Mods wise, for the helmet we're taking 2 copies of hands-on for some serious super energy gains from Flesh at Storm kills and Kinetic Siphon to allow Monte Carlo to spawn orbs on double kills. For the gloves we have 2 melee fonts to increase our melee stat by plus 40 points, which puts us at 200 total stat, then 1 copy of heavy-handed so that Flesh at Storm kills occasionally make orbs. For the chest piece we have general resist mods, then for the boots we're taking stacks on stacks, invigoration and recuperation. Finally for the class item we have time dilation, outreach and reaper for extended font duration and improved melee and orb gen. As far as the optimal gameplay loop is concerned, you're going to want to spam your Flesh at Storm volleys as often as you get them, because after a volley is fully depleted, it should only take roughly 4 to 5 bayonet kills before you repeat the process all over again, and even less if you're running this build in a fireteam activity. Seriously, the increased energy you get for simply having teammates is incredibly noticeable, but that isn't to say it still isn't great for solo play, because remember, with a high enough super stat, you'll also be spamming your Blade Fury, which, as we discussed, fully refunds your melee charges. Put it all together and you have yourself an incredibly potent build with really strong damage output that's also very fun to run. Green Man forever. As always, there will be a dim link at the top of the description for you to copy the build hassle-free, and the fashion I used is on screen now in case you want to copy that too. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed making your Green Man build with me, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now, dear viewer.